Welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Welcome back from the 4th of July weekend. And we come bearing lots of news. So about Trump's friend, Jeffrey Epstein, to be fair, also Bill Clinton's friend. He's been arrested. It's a disastrous story we're gonna get to in a little bit. Trump has plenty of disastrous stories, as always, throughout this show. But also the fight between AOC and Nancy Pelosi. Drums.
Or the fight between Nancy Pelosi and reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the fight between all of Washington, D.C. and reality, because they are on the side of Pelosi. They're like, reality, what name so? So we'll get to that, and if you think I might be a little upset about that, you would be correct. So you can look forward to that, and that'll be fun. And also, happy birthday to Anna Kasparian.
Yay!
Okay.
Yesterday, it was yesterday.
It was yesterday,
Yeah.
but happy birthday.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, fun for everybody. Okay, let's do it. We got a huge show ahead.
Charges against Jeffrey Epstein. The charges allege that Epstein sexually abused young girls by enticing them to engage in sex acts for money.
That was the US attorney for the Southern District of New York outlining the criminal charges that Jeffrey Epstein is facing. He has been arrested, he is in custody, and this is following an investigation into acts involving minors, minor girls to be specific. In fact, we have some more video from the US attorney outlining exactly what he's accused of doing. Take a look.
Beginning in at least 2002 and continuing until 2005, Epstein is alleged to have abused dozens of victims by causing them to engage in sex acts with him at his mansion in New York and at his estate in Palm Beach, Florida. The victims, all underage girls at the time of the alleged conduct, were given hundreds of dollars in cash after each encounter, either by Epstein or by one of Epstein's employees. The underage girls were initially recruited to provide Epstein with massages and often did so nude or partially nude. These massages became increasingly sexual in nature and would typically include one or more sex acts as specified in the indictment. As alleged, Epstein also paid certain victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly abused. This allowed Epstein to create an ever-expanding web of new victims. This conduct, as alleged, went on for years, and it involved dozens of young girls, some as young as 14 years old at the time that they were allegedly abused. As alleged, Epstein was well aware that many of his victims were minors, and not surprisingly, many of the underage girls that Epstein allegedly victimized were particularly vulnerable to exploitation.
Now, this isn't the first time he's faced charges, very similar charges. In fact, about a decade ago, prosecutors went after him for similar allegations. But unfortunately, Alexander Acosta, who is now Trump's labor secretary, was the prosecutor in that case. And what he did was pursue a non-prosecution plea deal without even notifying the victims that he was supposed to be representing. And so in secret, he works out this plea deal, and then Jeffrey Epstein gets off relatively easily. He wasn't even really in prison. He served some time behind bars, but in reality, he was able to leave and work and then come back and spend the night. So it was just a disgusting plea deal. Again, the victims were not notified about it. It was done in secret. And I'm happy to see that he's now facing charges again, and hopefully justice will be served in this case.
Okay, so a couple pieces of important context and some details to this. So this is about some of the same allegations between 2002 and 2005. Prosecutors now say dozens of girls were involved. Originally, investigators had found 30 victims. The Miami Herald, when they did their excellent investigation of this, found 60 victims. Credit should be given to Julie K. Brown. She's the Miami Herald reporter who originally broke the story. We actually gave her the Watchdog Award for Excellence in Journalism. this past year when we did our Watch That Correspondents' Dinner. It's the only award we give for journalism, and she more than earned it. It was a wonderful piece of reporting, and that is the only reason why this arrest has happened today. If she had not brought it back up, the authorities on their own almost certainly would not have re-engaged in this case. Now, the important distinctions. What the prosecutor explained today is, hey, listen, I'm in Manhattan. This plea deal happened at the state level in Florida, and it happened with the US attorneys down in Southern Florida. That doesn't have anything to do with me. I didn't agree to that plea deal, so it's not a deal for me. I'm now bringing up charges for what happened in New York as well as in Florida. So this is not double jeopardy, and it does not endanger or affect his earlier plea deal. So in Florida, that still is the case, but in New York, he's in a world of trouble. Now, to Anna's point about how little he served, he got a 13-month sentence on reduced charges of solicitation of prostitution. That's not the issue here. If he was soliciting prostitutes, I would be against this massive investigation and spending of all of this money on pursuing a rich guy who was getting massages from adults, right? That is not the case here. It is underage girls, and he clearly preyed on them. He had a method on preying on them. He would even sometimes look for homeless girls. Why? Because they had no power and no one to fight back for them. And that is why the abuse of power that happened down in Florida is even worse and uglier. But wait, you say, well, okay, he got 13 months, and Acosta, the current labor secretary, defends it by saying he was put on a sex offender list. Yeah, if you're a sex offender and you've had sexual relations with dozens of underage girls, it's not a big deal to be on the sex offender list. That's what the sex offender list was for. But for rich people, they always feel like, ooh, hey, look at that, we did slap him on the wrist. No, you're not supposed to slap a guy like that on the wrist. You're supposed to pursue real justice. But get a load of this. He was out of the 7 days of the week, he was allowed out of jail for 6 out of the 7. That's not a jail sentence. They said, oh, well, he has to go to work because he has a really important job. No, he has a really well-paying job. He ran a hedge fund, but it's not like, oh, it's earth-shattering, it's really important. No, that's saying he's a rich guy who bought off all of the prosecutors in this case. So for 6 out of 7 days, he went to work on his really important job of being rich. And so, I mean, it stunk to high heaven. That's why I love that Julie K. Brown exposed it in the first place and brought all this back up.
Exactly, so I actually wanna go to Julie K. Brown because following the arrest of Epstein, of course she was interviewed, and a part of this story that you cannot ignore or avoid is Epstein's ties to incredibly powerful individuals, including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. And so she was asked about that in a recent interview, and here's what she had to say.
Let me ask you quickly, if I could here, Julie, just about the rogues gallery we've been kind of talking about. Virginia brings up Alan Dershowitz, Larry Summers, Kevin Spacey, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump as well. I'm curious how you've seen that come to bear as you've been reporting this in the aftermath of it. We had Tom Winter, my colleague here at NBC News, talking about the duress that other principals in this investigation have been under because of Jeffrey Epstein, that individuals have been followed, their kids have been photographed, et cetera. How have you seen that nexus of power come to bear as you've reported this and in the aftermath of your reporting?
Well, I felt a lot of pressure. Needless to say, these are very powerful people, and I think that they're sweating a little bit, especially today. We don't know how much, how deep this went, how far reaching it went in government, but there's been a lot of people that, I could see their names on these message pads on a regular basis as part of the evidence. These message pads where they would call Epstein and leave messages such as, I'm at this hotel, why do you do that? Except that you're expecting him perhaps to send a girl to visit you at your hotel. So there's probably quite a few important people, powerful people who are sweating it out right now. We'll have to wait and see.
So that's telling, that answer was telling. And she's very careful in, she doesn't want to incriminate anyone who hasn't been found guilty of doing anything wrong. She doesn't speculate at all, but it has been reported over and over and over again that Epstein did have ties to these incredibly powerful people, both in the political world and the financial world. And so I'm curious to see how this all kind of plays out. But what I can't get over is what our current labor secretary did in the previous case in pursuing this non-prosecution plea deal. Why did he do that? Why is he currently Trump's secretary? Like what's going on there? And will there be justice in that case? Because what he did there was 100% wrong. You're supposed to be representing the victims here as a prosecutor, and he did the exact opposite.
In fact, there's an important detail on that we got to tell you. And again, Brown broke this part of the story as well back in the day. So he not only negotiated this awful deal. Just quick aside, guys. Epstein claims he has an important job. That's why he could get out of jail for 6 out of 7 days. Could you imagine if you went and made that case in front of a judge? Oh yeah, no, look, I did this terrible thing. I did child molestation, but I have a really important job as a mechanic. And so, by the way, your job is probably more important because it's more relevant to feeding your family. But that would never fly for someone who wasn't rich. Never, ever. But on top of that, Acosta then breaks the law by not informing the victims before they go and do the plea deal. The law clearly states, and in April of this year, a judge said, yes, this was a clear violation of the law. You must tell the victims. But Acosta did not tell the victims until it was too late. And the reason you'd want to do that is if you're doing a shady deal and you don't want the victims to ruin the sweetheart deal that you had with this rich guy. And look, there are big heavyweight Republicans and big heavyweight Democrats who are implicated in this. So, and while the idiots in the right wing and conspiracy theorists chase around pizza parlors in Washington, here's actual child molestation happening with some of the most, certainly some of the richest people in the country, and potentially with some of the most politically connected people in the country, and it's wide out in the open. You don't have to go to a non-existent basement of a pizza parlor. It's right here, but since it involves potentially their beloved Donald Trump, all of a sudden, the right-wing conspiracy theorists can't find the child molestation that's wide out in the open. Anyway, look, we don't know that Trump did it or Clinton did it, but they palled around. Here, I'm gonna give you a quote from Donald Trump right now, okay? But they all knew that his jet, Epstein's jet, was nicknamed the Lolita Express. And they would get on that jet, they'd pal around with this guy. A lot of people, Dershowitz says he got a massage, but nothing happened during the massage. Maybe so, he's good in court. Maybe he'll find himself in court and he'll have to explain how nothing happened in that massage. I don't know, that's what courts are for. Trump told New York Magazine back in the day about Epstein.
And this is in 2002.
Yeah, he said he's, quote, a terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side.
As always, Donald Trump displays a level of transparency that for some reason never gets picked up by people who should be paying attention, right? Yeah. Super transparent. So we'll see how this goes, but.
And remember, Donald Trump is on record of saying really young girls on tape, oh, you're really beautiful, one day when you grow up, etc. And remember, he's also on record in barging into Miss Teen USA's dressing room to catch them half naked.
Gross.
And even Donald Trump says Epstein likes him young. So they knew. At a minimum, they knew. And by the way, if justice is ever delivered to Epstein, this time around, he faces 45 years in prison. And you know how many days of the week he should be in prison? 7 out of 7.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a quote from one of the victims, and this was following the first attempt to prosecute Epstein, which of course led to that non-prosecution plea deal. Courtney Wild was one of the individuals who finally spoke out, felt comfortable enough to speak out, and she said, quote, Jeffrey preyed on girls who were in a bad way, girls who were basically homeless. He went after girls who he thought no one would listen to, and he was right.
Until now. Look, I want to celebrate this great journalism. That's why I keep mentioning Julie K. Brown. This is what good journalism is supposed to do. It's supposed to uncover and highlight an important issue and hopefully eventually lead to justice. It looks like we might be headed in that direction. And one important update that just happened in this story, prosecutors also said when they raided his homes and his mansions, they found hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of young girls. they're not positive yet whether they are pictures of underage girls, but they said that they are concerned about that based on the appearance of how young those girls look, including some locked away in a safe. So not only is he in potential trouble for the old charges, but also perhaps some new charges as well that would add on to his time. But it's not just Epstein. Make sure that we actually, no matter who it hurts in what political party, who else was involved here, we should do a real investigation of that for the first time.
When we come back from the break, we're gonna discuss Nancy Pelosi's very clear disdain for freshman Democrats and also Biden's apology. What did he apologize for?
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. Time for just a couple here, just fun ones. Cholera writes in on the member section, woo boy, after 4 days off, today's show should be something else. Well, we're about to get some fire and fury in a second. Eduardo writes in, happy birthday, Super Anna. Feliz
Cumpleaños.
Cumpleaños.
Did I say it good? Okay.
Okay, all right, well, at least you did, okay. And finally, oh no, I'll give you two. Omega Res Sigma Infinity Proteus says, how can people say that there is no first class, second class society in America? Come on, I mean, that Epstein's original ruling was unbelievable, plea deal was unbelievable, and shows you, of course, there's different Americas here. And Steve Alvarez on Twitter, by the way, if you want to get your comments read more often, yes, it's members make this show possible, and that's a perfectly good privilege of membership. tyt.com/join. And Steve Alvarez on Twitter says, damn, Anna Kasparian is brandishing weapons today.
I am.
Your
Do
guns.
my arms? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I didn't say it. Alvarez said it. Okay.
All right. I got to tell you guys about something important, okay? When you support our partners, you support us. And so if you open up a checkings account with Aspiration, which is an awesome financial institution, you're gonna get 1 month of free TYT membership. Go to aspiration.com/TYT to make it happen. That's the way that you're gonna be able to get the free membership. And then after you sign up, go to tyt.com/free30, the number 30, to redeem your membership. Again, you get 1 month for free. All right.
All right, let's do it.
Ready to have some fun?
Yeah.
All right. Joe Biden is apologizing following the kerfuffle in regard to his boastful comments about working with segregationists decades ago. Now, that didn't fare so well for him in the polls, especially after the Democratic debate where Kamala Harris confronted him about it. And so during a campaign event, he said this.
Now, was I wrong a few weeks ago to somehow give the impression to people that I was praising those men who I successfully opposed time and again? Well, yes, I was. I regret it. And I'm sorry for any of the pain or misconception they may have caused anybody. But should that misstep define 50 years of my record for fighting for civil rights, racial justice in this country? I hope not. I don't think so. That just isn't an honest assessment of my record. And I'm going to let my record and my character stand for itself and not be distorted or smeared.
Now remember, Biden worked with segregationists not toward progressive policy or even liberal policy. He worked with them to help push back against busing to integrate schools and communities. So that is something to keep in mind. And so now he's apologizing, I would argue, because it's really hurting his numbers in the polls. Yeah.
Of course. Look, it's one thing if you apologize before you get caught. It's another thing if after you get caught. And this one is after I got caught, and then I got busted in a debate, and then it hurt my poll numbers, and then I apologized, and then I called it smears. Okay, so look, I'm not one to dwell on was the apology good enough. I think that's laborious and kind of a mundane thing. And look, people apologize, they apologize, great. But man, that turn was quick, where he's like, I apologize for all the people who got offended, and then let me tell you about how they smeared me. It's a little tough to do both.
So let's hear what Kamala Harris's response was to this apology.
He is right to recognize the impact of his words, and I applaud him for doing that and having the courage to do it. If there is still plenty of disagreement between he and I, I'm going to take him at his word. But again, that doesn't address the issue of busing in America, and the fact that he still, we cannot rewrite history.
No, we can't rewrite history, and I agree with Kamala Harris on this. But one thing that I want to bring up really quick, Cenk, is what does Biden bring to the table? I mean, the only thing that we keep getting from the Biden supporters, both on the left and the right, is that he's the most electable of the bunch. But is he really the most electable when he makes these types of missteps over and over again, remains defiant, and then changes course once he notices that it's not so helpful for his poll numbers? I mean, is that really what's electable? What is he bringing to the table when it comes to policy? Is there anything, different about him? Is there anything that stands out about him? Is there anything creative about his policy proposals? What are his policy proposals? Do we know? Do we know? What does he bring to the table? Nothing. So far, nothing.
So I'm gonna get into details a little bit right there, because he says he just unveiled one of his first proposals ever. And it was a really bold one on the healthcare, a public option.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, first of all, that's been proposed by almost every candidate running for office, except now, obviously, a lot go way further than that, including all the way up to single payer, Medicare for all. Second of all, that was proposed during the time that Obama and Biden were in charge. And we accurately predicted that Obama and Biden didn't care about it, and we're gonna throw it under a bus. We were right. The defenders of Obama and Biden were wrong. They immediately jettisoned it at the first possible chance to appease Republicans. But by the way, it wasn't really to appease Republicans as much as it was to appease corporate Democrats. Guys like Joe Lieberman, who said, no, I also work for the drug companies and the health insurance companies, and under no circumstances will I allow public option to compete with them. I want to maintain their oligopoly. And so Obama and Biden said, yes, sir, of course, sir, and immediately threw out the public option. So why is the guy who couldn't get the public option done last time with a super majority, the guy we would want to get the public option now, let alone the fact that that is way too little and definitely way too late? So my point being here is, like Nancy Pelosi, he says, well, you should forgive all of the terrible things that I do and the mistakes that I do and the fact that I never fight Republicans because of what I am working on. So then we naturally ask, what are you working on? And the answer with Biden is almost always nothing.
Ryan Grimm wrote a fantastic op-ed in the Washington Post that I highly recommend everybody take a look at, because he outlines why there's this giant disconnect or divide among freshman Democrats and people like Nancy Pelosi and Biden. They went through a beating in the Reagan era, and I get that. But they were essentially beaten to submission, and now they just cave when it comes to any and all progressive principles. They do not fight because they are convinced that the America that we live in today is the exact same America that we were living in under the Reagan administration, and that is simply not the case. And so I'm not interested in having a debate or a conversation with defeatists from that era who have learned one lesson and one lesson only and refuse to see how the country has progressed and changed since then. So Biden is not a fighter because he's been conditioned to not be a fighter.
Which brings us back around to the original segregationist story. So did Joe Biden work with segregationists to get concessions out of them and say, God, this is uncomfortable working with people who can't stand black people and think that they are inferior to white people, that they are a different species of human beings? I mean, that is just atrocious. But I had to hold my nose, but look at what I got out of them. No, he went towards them and said, oh, you guys are right, man, we shouldn't do busing. Now, you could have a variety of opinions on busing back then or today, but to brag that you went towards the segregationists and helped them pass anti-busing legislation at the federal level. And on one of the bills, you know who was his co-sponsor? Strom Thurmond, who ran. Now, he didn't get mentioned because he wasn't in that original quote from Biden, but Biden on many occasions in other quotes while running has bragged about working with Strom Thurmond. He was a Republican who ran, but before that, he ran on a separate third-party ticket for president as a segregationist. That was a segregationist ticket. So that's his main claim to fame, Strom Thurmond. And Biden's like, I co-sponsored it with Strom Thurmond.
Civility.
Civility when you are going towards racists rather than fighting them is not at all what we need in today's America. Not remotely. So if you want, cowed leaders who bow down to people like Donald Trump, we already got that in spades. I mean, just walk over to any leadership position in the House or the Senate, and you'll find it, right? And Anna's absolutely right. Ryan's book, We've Got People, is an excellent description. The Washington Post article is a fantastic excerpt from it, but you should read the whole book. ShopTYT.com. We've got it over there. It's all the way back into the 1980s and how they were beaten into submission, all the way to today. And of course, there's another factor, which is that they all work for the same people. So Biden has literally said, if you give me $250,000, I will make sure that I listen to you after I win. I mean, bless his heart for being honest about that, but he's basically saying, you give me money, I work for you. I work for you. I don't work for the voters. Nancy Pelosi brags about raising $500 million from those giant donors. These guys, these Democrats, celebrate their incompetence and their
weakness.
And if you think that's electable, not only are you wrong on the policy, because we'll get nothing done for 4 years, but you're also wrong on the politics. Hillary Clinton already ran a campaign saying, I will work with Republicans, I will fight for the status quo, and I'm not gonna change much. Biden is more conservative than Hillary Clinton. Terrible idea to run him. He's the least electable, not the most electable.
Well, speaking of weak Democrats, let's move on to Nancy Pelosi, who gave an interview to the New York Times and said a bunch of things that will enrage Cenk, have already enraged me. All right. During a sit-down interview with Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, Nancy Pelosi could not hide her disdain for freshman Democrats. Now, remember, there were freshman Democrats like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ilhan Omar, who refused to vote in favor of appropriating billions of dollars to Border Patrol without promises that the conditions in these detention facilities would improve. And Pelosi was very upset about that. So she tells Maureen Dowd the following: all these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, but they didn't have any following. They're 4 people, and that's how many votes they got. So she's specifically talking about Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, basically people who are in Congress now fighting for people rather than the corporate world or people in positions of power. And the fact that she continuously dismisses them like this is so incredibly infuriating, because it's not just about dismissing these women, it's about dismissing the constituents they represent. She also says, if the left doesn't think I'm left enough, so be it. As I say to these people, come to my basement. I have these signs about single payer from 30 years ago. I understand what they're saying, but we have a responsibility to get something done, which is different from advocacy. We have to have a solution, not just a Twitter fight.
I want to break that quote down a little bit. So you've been working on this for 30 years. How's that working out for you, Nancy? So are you a totally incompetent legislator that couldn't get it done in 30 years, and that now says we shouldn't even try today because it's too hard to do? Okay, then plant your flag and say, I stand for incompetence and never getting results. Or were you never trying at all in the first place, and that's why it's in your basement? It's not a bragging thing to say, I got a sign in my basement from 30 years ago about this thing that I've never done anything about. I mean, that is a complete admission of failure. and Maureen Dowd firmly plants her lips on her ass.
Absolutely.
And goes, oh, wow, how brilliant of you to completely fail on this issue and to continue to fail. Bravo, a remarkable skill as a legislator.
No, you're absolutely right. The way that Maureen Dowd, by the way, transparently talks about her love, and it's an op-ed, right? It's not listed as a hard news story, to be fair, but I mean, she presents Pelosi with a box of chocolates and
Literally.
writes about it.
Literally.
Writes about it. What?
Maybe it's symbolism for Forrest Gump. Life's a box of chocolates with Nancy Pelosi. You never know what you're gonna get inside. Could be a Republican proposal. It could be lying down. It ain't gonna be a progressive proposal, that's for sure. Look, I'm gonna give you some quotes to back up what Anna's saying. I already did a fiery video about this over the weekend, but we have new updates because now AOC is fighting back and etc. But a lot of people had comments from the video saying, so did she kill single payer in her basement? Or did she just bury it there? Or did she steal other people's signs 30 years ago so the word wouldn't get out about single payer and put it in her basement? But now to Maureen Dowd, she says, in 1987, as the plague decimating gay men raged, she defied the advice of Democratic leaders and sang out that she had come to Washington to fight for AIDS, or fight AIDS. Maureen, in order to find Nancy Pelosi doing anything progressive, you had to go back to 1987. Did that not occur to you? Second of all, if you're from San Francisco and you're not fighting against AIDS, you're not likely to get a second term in office. So this is like the big, like, whoa, but you don't know how liberal Nancy Pelosi is. She went from San Francisco and fought to get money for AIDS. Of course she did, of course you'd be maniacal too. And did you notice? She defied Democratic leaders. But now, Maureen, you're sitting here going, how dare these insolent 4 young ladies defy Democratic leaders? That's the whole point of your article. But here she's like, she sang out in defiance when she was a young legislator. That's why Nancy Pelosi's so awesome.
No, can I give you more?
But Maureen Dowd, you're supposed to be sophisticated and intellectual. Can you not see that unbelievable irony?
I gotta give you more, Let's go to graphic 10. This is again from Maureen Dowd in regard to Nancy Pelosi. Even with all her remarkable skill, it is a Herculean task to weave together her anarchic progressives and the moderates who helped flip the House by winning in districts where Trump won in 2016.
Okay, Maureen, it's okay, just say it. Say you love the status quo because you're rich, you love the establishment, you're a conservative Democrat, and you hate progressives, because that's what you said in that sentence. The progressives are filled with anarchy. I mean, my God, to try to help the American people will lead to chaos.
No, let's talk about what that means though, because she's not saying anarchy in the context of they want to deregulate industries or they want to do away with laws. She's talking about anarchic in the context of they're not following the rules in Congress. They don't know their role, right? They're not paying their dues. That's what it's about.
Their role, if you believe not just in Washington Democrats, but Washington media, is shut up, don't do anything, don't rock the boat. The donors don't want the boat rocked, it's their boat. So, there these annoying women fighting for their voters. Outrageous. Don't you know that the rules are you shut up and you do as you're told and don't do anything for at least 10, 20 years. But by the way, when Pelosi came in, she was singing her defiance to Democratic leaders. God, all of it is disgusting. And did you notice also the progressives are anarchy in that sentence, but the moderates helped flip the House against Trump. The moderates are wonderful. And in fact, the New York Times in a separate piece that Maureen Dowd refers to in this article as well, called them the mighty moderates. It make them seem heroic, like, hey, they have more votes, as Pelosi points out here. They have more votes than the progressives. They do. Did you ever, New York Times, did you ever think why? How did they get that power? Did you ever write stories about the source of their power? Like, for example, Eliot Engel now being challenged by the Just Democrats. He has 1% of his donations from small donors, 99% from large donors. Did you think, hey, maybe Eliot Engel's source of power and Nancy Pelosi's source of power is really large donors and corporate donors? That's why they might, hey, look at that. In legislation, they back really large donors and corporate donors. But the New York Times journalists didn't consider that at all. They just say, oh, they have more power, they have more money. That's journalism? That's pathetic. Kissing up to power, I'm not anywhere near done.
So the one thing that I find so interesting is that journalists are supposed to look at evidence and use that evidence right in front of them to write their stories, to form their opinions if they're op-ed writers, for instance. And here we have the largest case study, the biggest, most prominent case study for why moderate members of Congress are actually not helpful to the Democratic Party. We had a moderate, a mighty moderate, run against, I'm not even exaggerating, possibly the dumbest person in public life that I've ever heard from, Donald Trump.
Yeah,
right?
of course,
I mean,
not remotely an exaggeration.
He makes the cast of Jersey Shore seem like they're Rhodes Scholars. Like, let's just
and
keep
not
it
so
real.
orange.
And yes, so with that said, you have a mighty moderate who lost to that guy. And you're gonna claim that mighty moderates are the ones that we should be championing in the Democratic Party? That is absurd.
Mighty moderates lost to a male version of Snooki. And you're still saying, yeah, oh yeah, they're so good. Not only are they good to win, but they're good at fighting against Trump. So, which is the exact opposite as we just proved to you. But I'm gonna give you 2 more quotes and we gotta go on to AOC and her fight back from this article. I can give you 1,000, I can spend all day on it, but here's the last 2. Maureen Dowd says, on top of that, many Democrats see Pelosi as the thin blue line, albeit a fiery orange and hot pink hues standing between them and a lawless Trump. All right, first of all, what are you talking about? She is standing between progressives and Trump. That's because she's
protecting him.
Protecting Trump. Look, but literally, Maureen, I don't know if you live on this planet, but on this planet, the person who has the power to impeach Trump for his lawlessness is the Speaker of the House. And she is going around everywhere and saying, I will not impeach him. I will not impeach him on a boat. I will not impeach him on a goat. I won't do it under any circumstance. Even Justice Amash, one of the most conservative, former Republican in Congress said, when Nancy Pelosi keeps saying that they don't have a strong enough case, that is sending a message to everyone that is the opposite of the Mueller report, as if we have a weak case for impeachment. This guy left the Republican Party on principle because they wouldn't impeach a guy who is clearly lawless. And the one person who is a bedrock for Trump is Nancy Pelosi, but Maureen Dowd flips it on its head. She's a thin blue line, fiery orange with passion fighting Trump. Look, that's nothing but that is so biased that it is a lie. And one last one, she says, while the president was squandering millions to prove his manliness by rolling out tanks and jets on the 4th, that part is true, Pelosi was holed up at her vineyard getaway in Napa with her family, eating Mexican food.
So hold up, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, hold on. What else did she do in her-
They live in different worlds,
guys. In her
really
bunker, in her fighting Trump. Holed up in her vineyard getaway in Napa with her family, eating Mexican food, rereading the Mueller report, and preparing to unman the president with 1,000 legal and legislative cuts.
Please.
Come on,
So
man.
let me ask you something. Is appropriating $4.6 billion for Border Patrol without safeguards to ensure that those detention facilities improve and children aren't living in squalor, is that an example of her legislative cuts?
She said 1,000 legal and legislative cuts and she couldn't name one.
No, of course she couldn't
name one.
Of course she couldn't name one. Come on. I mean, it's incredible to me because again, the frustration that you see from Pelosi in this interview is all about the fact that you had members of Congress stand up to her and say, no, we're not going to throw taxpayer money at Border Patrol when they are not planning on improving the conditions that these migrants are being kept in. Why? Why would we throw money at that? And Pelosi, the whole point of having the Democrats voting in favor of Democrats and having them control the House is because they are supposed to serve as a form of checks and balances to the executive branch or to the Senate, which is dominated by Republicans right now. But is Pelosi actually doing that?
And by the way, on the Republican version of the bill, the one that Pelosi backed and helped to pass eventually, or about 100 Democrats voted for it. It wasn't just 4. Those 4 also were against Nancy Pelosi's version, which was also weak sauce, but the Republican version that actually passed was horribly, ridiculously weak. It gave Trump everything he wanted. And Pelosi is in a rage, not because she lost to Trump, because anyone had the temerity to point out that she lost to Trump, because she's used to the Maureen Dowds and the New York Times of the world kissing her ass no matter what she does. Last thing on that quote, Anna's right. I mean, the cluelessness of these elitists sitting there going, oh my God, she's in her Napa Valley vineyard eating, but she is eating Mexican food, okay? By the way, Trump also eats Mexican food and brags about it. Rereading the Mueller report, in other words, she never read it. This is the first time she's reading it.
Right.
And you never bothered to challenge her on it. She never read it in the first place, didn't care about it. Rereading the Mueller report, who cares if she's reading it or rereading it? Is she going to do anything about it? But they write it as if like we should celebrate her vineyard in Napa, not realizing that's why people can't stand Nancy Pelosi in the first place, not because she's too progressive, but because she's viewed as too elitist and in the pockets of those large donors who got her that vineyard in the first place.
So let's talk about AOC's response. First, she responded to the comments minimizing freshman Democrats by saying that public whatever is called public sentiment, and wielding the power to shift it is how we actually achieve meaningful change in this country, which I give her so much credit for that very classy response to a classless Pelosi who just completely, again, minimized, but I think minimize is almost a euphemism for how she insulted them in this interview. And she even said this, let's go to graphic 4. With all due respect, the press likes to make a story that is more about Democrats divided than the fact that Mitch McConnell doesn't care about the children. That's what Pelosi said in this interview with Maureen Dowd. So Pelosi, are you really concerned about the conditions those children are being kept in? Because I agree that Mitch McConnell is terrible. But I also agree with those who find establishment Democrats terrible for appropriating billions of dollars to the very individuals who are keeping these children in squalor.
So, yes, I agree that AOC is way too polite.
No, it's good, it's good. I'm glad that she is.
Yeah, but we are not, okay? So let me go to a second tweet by Ocasio-Cortez here. Because now, a writer at The Independent, which is a paper out of the UK, Jay Caruso, who's a conservative, by the way, loves Nancy Pelosi. Of course he does. Conservatives are like, this is the best you can do, Democrats. So be good little boys and girls and know that Nancy Pelosi should be your leader. And then he probably laughs his ass off. He goes, these idiots. She gives us everything we want. Anyway, he wrote an article about how historic her accomplishments are and how she has worked with Republicans and Democrats to get things elected, to get things passed, I should say. So first of all, let's note 2 parts of that. She worked with Republicans on Republican ground and gave them almost everything they wanted. That's why you like her.
Exactly.
Okay, so that doesn't help progressives or her cause at all. Secondly, every other thing that he listed was in the beginning of Obama's term when they had massive majority in the House. They keep bragging about like, did you know that she got the Affordable Care Act passed? Well, first of all, it was a Democratic proposal that was incredibly mild, originally done by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, originally called Romney Care, named after Mitt Romney's plan in Massachusetts. But even so, even if it was an incredibly bold plan, you have the majority in the House by a large margin at that point. If you're a master legislator, why would that be difficult to pass? Did you know she got Lilly Ledbetter passed? Lilly Ledbetter is a great law, but that's a layup if you're a Democrat. And that got passed immediately. It's like saying, I mean, these are the simplest things in the world. And they're like, oh my God, with only a super majority, she happened to pass a Republican light version of a bill. Amazing, how did they say this stuff with a straight face? And she says, they say, or this Caruso guy says, instead of casual dismissal, Ocasio-Cortez could instead attempt to learn a thing or two from someone serving their second stint as Speaker of the House. Learn what? How not to fight? How to give Republicans everything they want? So Ocasio-Cortez takes a tweet of someone referring to that article and says, quote, these are all Pelosi quotes, a glass of water could have beat Trump, okay? That's the reference. By the way, Nancy Pelosi, your buddy Hillary Clinton couldn't beat Donald Trump. So is she worse than a glass of water? What does that mean? Why didn't you run for president if you're such a master legislator? Oh, you couldn't beat Trump. None of your mighty moderate friends could beat Trump. So what the hell are you talking about? And then she goes to another quote from Pelosi, the green dream or whatever. Gee, I wonder if she's a progressive, I can't quite tell. And now the reference to quote, their public whatever, right? And then AOC says, those aren't quotes from me, they're from the speaker. Having respect for ourselves doesn't mean we lack respect for her. It means we won't let everyday people be dismissed. That's exactly right. She didn't get elected in her district to serve Nancy Pelosi and her corporate donors. AOC doesn't take any corporate donors. She doesn't have to dial for dollars, another thing she pointed out in a tweet. She spends all of her time representing her actual constituents, which is a total new phenomenon for Nancy Pelosi. She's like, the voters, why would we care about them? You know how much money I raised over $580 million for the Democratic Party. So you could learn a thing or two from me about how to sell out to the rich. Thanks, but no thanks. The reason why she has that massive following online is not because she had a lot of money, she didn't. It's not like she had a lot of institutional advantages. Did it ever occur to you, Maureen Dowd or Nancy Pelosi or any of you mainstream media and establishment figures, that maybe she got those millions upon millions of followers because people liked her ideas? And they don't think that. You know what they think? Because it's actually, interestingly, a deeply sexist and somewhat racist idea. Oh, they like the way she looks. That's that's why she has 4 million followers on Twitter, or 5 million.
I hear that all the time.
Oh, they like the, and it's not Republicans or Donald Trump who says that. It's people like Nancy Pelosi. Oh, they're not popular. They're only 4 people. They have their green dream or whatever. They have their public whatever. It's only because she's good looking. Now that's as sexist as it gets. Absolutely. No, there's a lot of good looking people in the world. That isn't the point. The point is we love her ideas. And that makes you deeply uncomfortable because you hate those left-wing ideas and you've been fighting against them your whole life. And the only reason why everybody in the country doesn't know that is because the New York Times and all the established media cover your ass. Instead of challenging power, they bow down to you. And that's why I'm deeply frustrated with the New York Times and the mainstream media.
Well, let's give Pelosi some time to go downstairs to her basement and give those single payer signs a nice big embrace. But when we come back from the break, we're gonna talk about Justin Amash and how he's calling Pelosi out on her refusal to push for impeachment of Donald Trump. Come right back.